What would you do if a child suddenly appeared on a deserted road in the middle of the night, crossed an impossible distance in a single leap, and then vanished into thin air? What if, after seeing that child, your vehicle became trapped in a way that no machine, no tow truck, and no amount of manpower could explain? Tonight's story comes from a truck driver who experienced something so strange that even seasoned rescue operators were left speechless. Let's begin. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Before we start today's ghost stories, don't forget to like and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you all very much. Today marks episode 83. Featuring real paranormal experiences sent in by viewers. If any of you have ghost stories you'd like to share, you can send them through Gmail or Zalo using the contact information displayed on the screen. Now, without wasting any more of your time, let's move straight into today's story. This is a very mysterious and fascinating story sent by a listener whose previous story was featured in episode 54. The story commonly known as the woman in the pink dress. For those who haven't heard that story, it took place while he was working at a construction site in SOC Trang province. At that time, one of his co-workers had been influenced by a female spirit dressed in a pink traditional dress. The spirit allegedly lured the man into jumping from the 10th floor of a building, causing him to die instantly. Even today, according to the storyteller, the spirit of the woman in pink and the spirit of his deceased co-worker occasionally appear together near the entrance of a large hospital in SOC Trang. Because that story contains many important details, listeners who haven't heard it may want to go back and listen to episode 54 first. The story he is sharing today happened after those events. After witnessing his co-worker jump from the 10th floor to his death, he was deeply traumatized. From that day forward, he completely abandoned construction work. He no longer wanted anything to do with construction sites. After leaving the profession, he spent time learning different trades and eventually earned a driver's license. He said that driving is considered one of those occupations where people often encounter strange spiritual events. And today's story is one of those experiences. After receiving his license, he became friends with a driver named Mr. T. The two met through an online community for long-distance drivers. Anyone working in transportation would probably recognize the group. It served as a place where drivers could exchange knowledge and help each other. At the time, the storyteller was still new to driving. His skills were not yet strong, and he was eager to gain more experience behind the wheel. Mr. T taught him many practical lessons and driving techniques. Because they worked in the same profession, the two became quite close. One day, Mr. T was preparing for his wedding. That afternoon, he needed to travel to his future wife's home in Zhongriyang District, Kianjiang Province. Mr. T asked the storyteller to drive him there. The plan was simple. That evening, they would travel from Kano to Zhongriyang. After dropping Mr. T off, the storyteller would drive back to Kano alone. The following morning, he would drive relatives from Kano back to Kianjiang for the wedding ceremony. In other words, he would make the trip twice. The first trip would be from Kano to Zhongriyang and then back to Kano. The second trip would be from Kano back to Zhongriyang again the next morning. During the first journey, Mr. T handled the driving because the storyteller was unfamiliar with the route. There were only two people in the vehicle. Mr. T sat behind the wheel while the storyteller sat in the passenger seat. As they approached the bride's hometown, the storyteller noticed something unusual about the landscape. The road became extremely isolated, One side was lined with bamboo and thorny vegetation. The other side ran alongside a canal. Along the canal grew rows of tall reed-like plants. These plants were much taller than ordinary shrubs. Some of them were even taller than a person. Anyone who has traveled the road between Kendo and Zhongliang would likely recognize the area. One side was dense with bamboo. The other side bordered a canal filled with tall vegetation. As they continued driving, Mr. T suddenly spoke. "Remember this stretch of road carefully. I'll explain later." The storyteller didn't understand what he meant. When they finally arrived at the bride's house, it was already around 6 o'clock in the evening. He stayed for a short meal, chatted with everyone, and then prepared to drive back to Kendo. By then it was already after 7. As he walked toward the vehicle, Mr. T stopped him. "Do you remember the road I told you to pay attention to?" The storyteller nodded. Mr. T looked serious. "When you drive back tonight, if anyone asks for a ride on that road, don't stop. No matter what happens, don't let anyone into your vehicle. If someone waves you down, keep driving. If you see anything strange, fold your rearview mirror inward. Do not look into it. Do not turn around. Just drive straight back to Kendo. Do you understand?" The storyteller was confused. "Why?" Mr. T didn't explain. He simply replied, "Just do exactly as I said. When you get home, call me. Then get some sleep, because tomorrow morning you'll be driving my relatives to the wedding." The storyteller agreed. He got into the vehicle and began the journey back toward the road back to Kano was extremely quiet. Even though it was only around 7 or 8 o'clock at night, most of the houses along the route were already dark. People had closed their doors and gone to sleep. The storyteller described the area as incredibly isolated. Sometimes he would drive 100 or 200 meters before seeing another house. The homes were scattered far apart from one another. To make matters worse, there were no street lights. If you were driving from Zhongliang toward Kano, the houses would be on your right. In front of those houses were rows of trees and small gardens. On the left side of the road was a canal. Along the canal grew dense reeds and tall grasses. As he continued driving beside the canal, he eventually approached the exact section of road Mr. T had warned him about earlier. Because the road was dark and empty, he turned on his high beams. The powerful headlights illuminated a long stretch of road ahead. That was when he saw a child. The boy was walking slowly toward the vehicle from the opposite direction. The storyteller reduced his speed and watched carefully. As the vehicle drew closer, something strange happened. The child suddenly leaped. In a single motion, he jumped from the bushes on the right side of the road all the way across to the vegetation beside the canal on the left. Then he disappeared. Just like that. Gone. The storyteller immediately felt uneasy. Something about what he had just witnessed made no sense. The road wasn't narrow. 2 cars could easily pass each other on it. That meant the road was at least 4 meters wide, possibly more. Yet this child had crossed the entire distance effortlessly with one jump. The storyteller estimated the boy looked no older than 7 or 8 years old. No ordinary child could perform a jump like that, especially not one that covered such a distance so easily. But this wasn't his first encounter with the supernatural. After everything he had experienced in the past, including the horrific incident involving his co-worker, he already suspected what he had just seen. He immediately remembered Mr. T's warning. If you see anything strange, fold the rearview mirror inward. Only then did he understand why. Mr. T didn't want him looking into the back seats, perhaps because there was a chance he might see something sitting there. Without hesitation, he folded the mirror inward and continued driving. He refused to look back. Eventually, he reached Kano safely. At that time, he lived in the Hong Lon residential area, opposite the central bus station. The neighborhood was still under development. Because of that, he couldn't park the vehicle directly in front of his house. Instead, he left it about 200 meters away on a newly filled dirt lot. He had parked there many times before. Whenever he returned home late and felt too tired to return the vehicle immediately, he would leave it there overnight and return it the next day. That night seemed no different. He drove into his usual parking spot, but the moment the front wheels entered the sandy ground, something unexpected happened. The front tires sank. At first, he wasn't worried. He pressed the accelerator, hoping to move forward. Instead, the rear wheels sank as well. Within moments, the entire vehicle became stuck. Completely stuck. The storyteller tried everything he could think of, but the vehicle wouldn't budge. What confused him most was how shallow the depression actually was. The tires had only sunk a short distance into the ground. Normally, a vehicle should have been able to escape easily. Yet, this one wouldn't move at all. Exhausted, he called family members for help. They brought tools. They dug around the tires. They placed stones underneath. Nothing worked. Soon neighbors arrived to help. More people joined in. In total, 9 people spent hours trying to free the vehicle. They dug. They pushed. They placed more rocks beneath the tires. The storyteller sat behind the wheel and repeatedly tried to drive out. Nothing happened. In fact, the vehicle sank even deeper. The storyteller pointed out something important. The vehicle was a manual transmission 7-seater with rear-wheel drive. Only the rear wheels provided power. The front wheels weren't responsible for propulsion. Yet somehow the front end had sunk first. To him, it simply didn't make sense. By that point, everyone was exhausted. But the vehicle absolutely had to be freed. At 5 o'clock the next morning, he needed to begin picking up wedding guests. There was no choice. Eventually, he called a towing service. The rescue truck arrived and attached a steel cable to the vehicle. The operator prepared to pull. The cable snapped. They tried again. The cable snapped again. Then again, and again, for times in total. Finally, on the 5th attempt, another problem appeared. The rescue truck itself became stuck. The situation grew even more ridiculous. A second, larger recovery vehicle was called to assist. The larger truck first pulled the smaller rescue vehicle free. Then it positioned itself and connected a heavy-duty steel cable to the 7-seater. Everyone watched. The engine roared. The cable tightened. And then, snap, the cable broke again. That made 5 broken cables altogether. The rescue driver climbed down from his truck. His face had turned pale. He walked over to the storyteller and said, "I've been doing this for 15 years. I've pulled overloaded trucks out of mud. I've recovered vehicles from places much worse than this, but I've never seen anything like this. I've tried 5 or 6 times and still can't move your vehicle." The man paused before continuing. "Listen, I don't think anyone wants this vehicle to leave tonight, no matter what method you use. I don't think it's coming out. Just wait until morning." After saying that, both rescue drivers left. Neither of them accepted any payment. The storyteller was left with no options. He returned home, took a shower, and tried to get some sleep. But sleep didn't come easily. Whenever he closed his eyes, he saw something disturbing. In his dream, he saw a child sitting inside his vehicle. The child simply sat there quietly, watching him. The next morning, he returned to inspect the vehicle. When he opened the door, he froze. The rear seats were covered with sand. There was sand everywhere. Yet the previous night, nobody had sat in those seats. The windows had remained closed. He couldn't understand how the sand had gotten there. Around 6:30 in the morning, several drivers from the transportation group arrived to help. The night before, after hearing what had happened, Mr. T had posted the story online and asked fellow drivers for assistance. 5 men came. Among them was an older driver who seemed especially experienced. The man quietly walked around the vehicle. He inspected it carefully. Then he stopped in front of the hood. He lit a cigarette. After taking several puffs, he crouched down, using the cigarette and a few items from his pocket. He appeared to perform some kind of ritual. Then he stuck the cigarette into ground. Nobody said anything. Everyone simply watched. The cigarette continued burning. When it finally burned out completely, the older driver stood up. He walked to the vehicle, opened the door, sat behind the wheel, started the engine, and drove forward. The vehicle rolled out effortlessly, as though it had never been stuck at all. The storyteller stood there speechless. Just the night before, 2 recovery trucks had failed. Multiple steel cables had snapped. 9 people couldn't move the vehicle. Yet now it came free instantly. The older driver smiled. You're still new to this profession. You haven't learned everything yet. Sometimes, when someone asks for a ride, he paused. You should let them start the engine first. The storyteller didn't fully understand what the man meant, but he never forgot those words. After thanking the drivers for their help, the storyteller continued with his original plan. He drove to pick up Mr. T's relatives and transported them to Zhongyang for the wedding ceremony. The wedding went smoothly. However, that very night, something strange happened to him. He suddenly developed a fever, not just a mild fever. He also began coughing constantly. Days passed, then weeks, yet the illness refused to go away. For nearly an entire month, he remained sick. No matter what medicine he took, the symptoms lingered. Eventually, he met Mr. T at a coffee shop. The two sat together and talked. During the conversation, the storyteller revealed everything. He described the deserted road. He described the mysterious child. He described how the child had crossed a road in a single impossible leap. He described the trapped vehicle, the broken cables, the strange sand covering the back seats, and the elderly driver who had somehow freed the vehicle with almost no effort. Mr. T listened quietly. When the story was finished, he nodded. Then he suggested something. Let's go back. Let's return to that road. The storyteller agreed. The 2 men bought fruit and offerings before traveling back to the exact location where the encounter had occurred. When they arrived, they placed the offerings beside the road. They burned incense. They bowed respectfully, and they apologized. The storyteller said that the experience felt very strange, because almost immediately afterward, his fever disappeared. His coughing stopped. The sickness that had tormented him for nearly a month vanished within a remarkably short time. From that day forward, he never suffered from those symptoms again. Looking back on the incident, He said that driving is often referred to as a profession protected by unseen forces. Many drivers develop certain customs and taboos over time. Some may sound superstitious. Others may seem impossible to explain. But after spending years on the road, many drivers develop a deep respect for things they cannot see. The storyteller insisted that every detail of this account was true. He had not exaggerated anything. Many people had personally witnessed the events involving the trapped vehicle, and because of that, he remained convinced that something supernatural had happened that night. He also shared a lesson he learned from the experience. It isn't only drivers who should show respect before beginning their work, no matter what profession someone chooses. It is important to show respect to those who came before us and to the unseen spirits believed to inhabit the places where we live and work. And that concludes the first story. A story about the spirit of a mysterious child encountered on a lonely road in Zhongriyang, Qianjiang province. But the next story is just as fascinating. It concerns the spirit of a woman who, while alive, had been known for her greed and selfishness. This story is connected to an earlier account featured in episode 75. The story about a series of deaths believed to be linked by a family curse in Qinghai. After 3 consecutive deaths occurred within the same family line, another strange event unfolded. This time, the setting was the home of the storyteller's aunt in Bentre province. Listeners who haven't heard episode 75 may want to listen to it later, as it provides important background information. At the time, the storyteller and her husband had traveled to Bentre to help her aunt and uncle renovate their house. Her uncle was a disabled war veteran and had received financial assistance from the government to build a new home. The property contained only 2 houses. One belonged to her aunt and uncle. The neighboring property had once belonged to an elderly woman known as Mrs. N. When Mrs. N was still alive, she lived there with one of her daughters. Throughout the area, she was known as a selfish and narrow-minded woman. The 2 households lived side by side, but their relationship was far from friendly. Whenever the chickens belonging to the storyteller's aunt accidentally wandered into Mrs. N's yard, Mrs. N would throw stones at them. Many of the chickens were injured because of her actions. As a result, when Mrs. N eventually passed away, very few neighbors attended her funeral. People remember how she had treated others during her lifetime. According to the storyteller, only her own children were present during the funeral procession. Not many outsiders came to pay their respects. One day, while visiting her aunt's house, the storyteller heard her aunt mention something disturbing. Ever since Mrs. N died, she'd been frightening people. The storyteller laughed at first, but her aunt seemed serious. Directly across from both properties stood a large coconut grove. The owner of the grove was wealthy and paid little attention to it. The trees were left to grow naturally. Fallen coconuts often accumulated on the ground without anyone collecting them. Whenever dry coconuts fell, the storyteller's aunt and uncle would sometimes go gather them. But Mrs. N had always been extremely possessive. Even though the grove didn't belong to her, she constantly competed with them over the fallen coconuts. Whenever the aunt's family arrived first, Mrs. N would become furious. And whenever Mrs. N arrived first, she collected everything she could find. Arguments were common. Sometimes she would spend the entire day shouting at people. Even years later, neighbors still remember her temper. One afternoon, the storyteller sat in the backyard with her aunt. The 2 were chatting while her aunt plucked gray hairs from her head. The weather was peaceful. The coconut trees swayed gently in the breeze. Then the storyteller heard something. a repetitive sound. Slap, slap, slap. It sounded exactly like someone bouncing on a bamboo bed. Anyone familiar with traditional bamboo furniture would recognize the noise instantly. At first, she ignored it, but the sound continued, again and again and again. Her aunt immediately became uneasy. "Come inside," her aunt said. The storyteller looked around. "But it's nice out here. Why should we go inside?" Her aunt didn't answer directly. Instead, she simply urged her again, "Come inside." The storyteller still didn't understand. Yet as the sound grew louder, her aunt suddenly grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the house. The moment they entered, her uncle asked what had happened. After hearing the story, he sighed. "You two were sitting near Mrs. N's land. She was trying to scare you." Then he shared his own experience. Not long before that, he had seen a dry coconut fall near Mrs. N's property. He decided to collect it. As he bent down to pick it up, he happened to glance through the window of Mrs. N's old house. What he saw chilled him. He claimed that Mrs. N was climbing down from her family altar. She crawled down from the altar and stared directly through the window at him. Even after witnessing that sight, he forced himself to grab the coconuts and return home. Over time, he had become accustomed to her appearances. He was no longer as frightened as before. According to him, Mrs. N simply didn't like people taking coconuts from the area. And even after death, she still behaved the same way. For nearly 3 months after arriving in Ben Tray, the storyteller never personally encountered Mrs. N's spirit. She heard the stories. She listened to her aunt and uncle talk about the strange incidents, but she had never actually seen anything herself. Then one day, everything changed. That afternoon, one of her cousins invited her into the backyard. "Come on," her cousin said. "Let's pick some coconuts." Because she had grown up in Kinno, which was already a fairly developed city, she loved spending time in the countryside. The gardens felt peaceful. The fresh air was refreshing, and seeing fresh coconuts hanging from the trees excited her. Together, they went outside. Her cousin climbed a coconut tree and began shaking it. Coconuts fell everywhere. Young coconuts, mature coconuts. Anything they could reach, they collected. The storyteller was having so much fun that she paid no attention to anything else. Eventually, they carried a large pile of coconuts back to the house. The moment they entered the yard, her aunt's expression changed. "Oh no, what have you done?" Her aunt stared at the pile. Then she looked at the storyteller. "You picked coconuts from Mrs. N's area?" The storyteller laughed. She thought her aunt was joking. Immediately, her aunt teased her. "Just wait. Mrs. N will probably come tonight and scare you." The storyteller wasn't worried. At that point, she still hadn't seen anything supernatural. She simply smiled and continued helping with the coconuts. The following days passed peacefully. Nothing unusual happened. Because of that, she completely forgot about the warning. In fact, she enjoyed it so much that she continued gathering coconuts from the area whenever she had the chance. Soon there was a huge pile stacked inside the house. Then, finally, something happened. The next morning, she was supposed to wake up early and help prepare meals for the construction workers renovating the house. But when morning came, her husband couldn't wake her. He called her name repeatedly. No response. He shook her. Still nothing. Alarmed, he rushed to get her aunt and uncle. When they entered the room, They immediately realized something was wrong. The storyteller was burning with fever. Her body felt like fire. She lay unconscious and delirious. The fever was so severe that the family panicked. They rushed her to a local medical clinic. Her temperature reached 43 degrees Celsius. It was the highest fever she had ever experienced in her life. Doctors gave her medication and worked to lower the fever. Only around midday did she finally regain consciousness. When she woke up, her aunt immediately said, "I told you. You picked coconuts from Mrs. N's place. Now she's bothering you." Her aunt promised that she would return home and prepare offerings for Mrs. N. She intended to ask the spirit to leave her niece alone. That evening, the storyteller returned to the house. She found that her aunt had already prepared food offerings and incense for Mrs. N. Everything had been arranged respectfully. The next day, her fever was gone, completely gone. She recovered as quickly as it had appeared. Not long afterward, the renovations were finished. A housewarming celebration was organized. Relatives gathered from different places to attend. Among the guests were the storyteller's parents. After the ceremony ended, her mother quietly pulled her aside. Then her mother said something unexpected. "You've been causing trouble again, haven't you?" The storyteller blinked in surprise. "What are you talking about?" Her mother continued, "You've been messing with someone else's coconuts again. Just because you see a tree doesn't mean you need to climb it or pick everything from it." The storyteller stared at her mother. She had no idea how her mother knew. After all, her mother had only just arrived. Her aunt and uncle had been busy all day preparing for the celebration. There hadn't been any opportunity for them to discuss the incident. Confused, she asked, "Who told you?" Her mother replied, "No one." The storyteller became even more confused. "If nobody told you, then how do you know?" Her mother's answer sent chills through her body. "Last night I had a dream. In the dream, Mrs. N came to see me." The storyteller immediately fell silent. Her mother continued, "She complained about you. She said you've only been here for a short time, but you've already destroyed her entire coconut grove. She said she was so angry she wanted to punish you." The storyteller listened carefully. Then her mother added another detail. But she said 2 men stopped her. Those men wouldn't let her touch you. They told her you were only a child and didn't understand. So instead of hurting you, she only gave you a fever. The storyteller felt goosebumps rising all over her body. She slowly asked, "Did she say who those 2 men were?" Her mother nodded. "Of course. They were your grandfathers. One was her paternal grandfather. The other was her maternal grandfather. Both men had already passed away years earlier. According to her mother, they had appeared in the dream and prevented Mrs. N from doing anything more serious. Mrs. N had supposedly warned them, "If she comes back and causes trouble again, I won't listen next time." After hearing that story, the storyteller never touched another coconut from that area again. Not because she was frightened, but because she felt she had already learned her lesson. As for whether the fever truly came from Mrs. N's spirit or was simply a coincidence, she couldn't say for certain. Yet the timing was difficult to ignore. And even now, years later, she still remembers every detail of what happened. The story doesn't end there, because according to the storyteller, this wasn't the only strange event connected to her family. There were other encounters, other dreams, other spirits that seemed determined to make their presence known. And some of them were far more frightening than the story of Mrs. N.